In the United States, the death penalty, legally known as capital punishment, is one of the most severe and highly controlled penalties in the American criminal justice system, and its operation follows a long, detailed, and constitutionally monitored process that begins from the moment a person is suspected of committing a capital offense, which typically refers to the most extreme types of crimes, usually aggravated forms of murder, certain federal acts of terrorism, large-scale drug trafficking that results in death, treason, and a few other crimes specifically listed under federal and state statutes. But even if a crime falls within those categories, prosecutors cannot automatically pursue a death sentence. Because U.S. constitutional law, especially the Eighth Amendment, and a series of Supreme Court decisions, requires that the death penalty be imposed only in cases where strict procedural safeguards are followed. The process begins with prosecutors reviewing the evidence to determine whether aggravating factors such as killing multiple victims, murdering a police officer, committing murder during another dangerous felony like kidnapping or robbery, using torture or extreme cruelty, or having a prior violent criminal record exists to make the case eligible for capital prosecution. If the case meets those criteria, the state or federal prosecutor must file formal notice of intent to seek the death penalty. In many states, a special committee, review board, or elected district attorney must approve the decision, and in federal cases, the U.S. Attorney's Office must submit the case to the Justice Department's Capital Review Committee, after which the U.S. Attorney General makes the final decision on whether the government will seek the death penalty. Once the prosecution formally declares it a capital case, the trial process becomes even more structured, because the U.S. Supreme Court requires a bifurcated system, meaning the trial happens in two major phases. First is the guilt phase, where a jury must decide whether the defendant is guilty of the charged capital crime. If the jury returns a not guilty verdict, the process ends and the defendant is acquitted. But if they return a guilty verdict for a capital offense, the case immediately moves to the penalty phase, which is essentially a second trial, focused solely on deciding between two possible sentences: death or life imprisonment, usually without the possibility of parole. During the penalty phase, both sides present evidence about aggravating and mitigating circumstances. And federal law as well as state laws require that every juror individually evaluate these factors. Aggravating factors are the features of the crime that make it especially serious, while mitigating factors focus on the defendant's background, upbringing, psychological condition, mental illness, intellectual disability, trauma, lack of prior serious criminal history, or any circumstance that might reduce moral blame. And under U.S. law, even a single juror has the right to consider any mitigating factor they believe is relevant. Because the Supreme Court has ruled that sentencing in capital cases must be individualized and not automatic. In almost all U.S. jurisdictions, the jury must reach a unanimous decision to impose a death sentence. If even one juror refuses to vote for death, the defendant must be sentenced to life imprisonment, and the judge cannot override the jury's refusal. Certain groups, including people with intellectual disabilities and individuals who committed the crime as minors, are categorically protected from the death penalty under Supreme Court rulings such as Atkins v. Virginia and Roper v. Simmons. After a death sentence is announced in court, the defendant is transferred to a high-security prison unit known as death row, where they will remain for many years, often more than a decade, while pursuing a complex series of appeals designed to ensure that the conviction and sentence comply with the Constitution. These appeals include direct appeals in which higher state courts or federal courts review the trial record, post-conviction relief where the defense may present new evidence, argue ineffective assistance of counsel, challenge procedural errors, or raise constitutional issues, and federal habeas corpus review, where federal courts examine whether the defendant's rights were violated during the state trial. Throughout this period, attorneys may challenge racial bias in jury selection, improper instructions to the jury, invalid aggravating factors, new DNA evidence, withheld evidence, or the constitutionality of the execution method itself. The Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment governs all execution methods. So courts frequently analyze whether lethal injection protocols or other methods such as electrocution, gas inhalation, firing squad, or nitrogen hypoxia meet constitutional standards. Many states use lethal injection as the primary method, typically involving a series of drugs designed to sedate and then stop the heart. Though drug availability issues have led some states to authorize alternative methods, before any execution can take place, the inmate may request clemency, which is a process where a governor, a clemency board, or the president for federal cases reviews the case to determine whether the death sentence should be commuted to life imprisonment. Clemency reviews often consider factors such as remorse, new evidence, mental health issues, unfairness in sentencing, or humanitarian concerns. When all appeals have been exhausted and clemency is denied, the state or federal government schedules an execution date and issues a legal document called an execution warrant or death warrant, which triggers the final phase of the process. In the days leading up to execution, the inmate is moved to a special holding area, often called a death watch cell, where they are closely monitored. They meet with attorneys, religious advisors, and are allowed certain final rights, including a last meal, depending on the state's policy. On the day of the execution, strict protocols must be followed to ensure compliance with the Eighth Amendment, which includes monitoring the inmate's physical condition, preparing the execution chamber, and allowing official witnesses, including selected family members of the victim and sometimes journalists, to attend. The execution is then carried out according to the method authorized by law, and after the procedure is completed, the death is certified by medical officials. Even though the death penalty remains legal in federal law and in many states, a significant number of states have abolished it through legislation or moratoriums, and national debate continues over issues such as wrongful convictions, racial disparities, high legal costs, moral objections, and whether the death penalty actually deters serious crime. Despite the controversy, the American judicial system continues to apply extensive safeguards, layers of review, and constitutional protections to ensure that any imposition of the death penalty is handled with the highest level of legal scrutiny, due process, and human rights considerations required under U.S. law.